Hey, what is up guys? It's Max from Max Reviews, and today I'm going to be doing a explanation for the ending of the movie It Follows. It Follows is a movie about a girl named Jay who has a boyfriend named Hugh, and Jay and Hugh go on a few dates. On the first date they go to a movie theater, and on the second date they end up having sex in the back of Hugh's car, and afterwards Hugh knocks Jay unconscious with some chloroform, and later Jay is woken up tied down to a chair in an abandoned parking lot. This is where Hugh explains to Jay that he is being followed by an entity. So he explains to Jay that she's going to be followed by this entity and that she has this curse, that this entity follows whoever the quote cursed person has sex with. So in order for him to get rid of the entity, he had to have sex with somebody else, and he had sex with his girlfriend Jay. And in order for Jay to get rid of the entity, she has to have sex with somebody else. So he explained this to her, and afterwards, Jay sees this spirit while she's tied down to the chair. And once she believes him, and they both run away from the warehouse, and she never sees him again. Later on, she discovers that her boyfriend Hugh was living under a fake name and a fake identity. So, being the normal person, she tries to find out who he really is. So, she uses the help of her neighbor Greg to find out his true identity, which is Jeff Redmond. So, with the help of Greg, they trace him back to his house, and this is where they're all sitting down on the lawn. And this is where Jeff explains that he got this entity because he had a one night stand with a random person, and in order to get rid of this spirit or entity from following him and trying to kill him, he has to pass it on to somebody else by having sex with somebody else. And because of this, Greg eventually invites everybody to his family's lake house where he teaches Jay how to shoot guns so she can protect herself if the entity ever shows up. A quick note to remember is that Greg actually is skeptical of this thing up until the point that he actually gets murdered by it, because when they're at the lakefront, they get attacked by the entity, and everybody believes Jay that the entity exists because they see floating chairs and floating items in the sky, and everybody but Greg believes them because Greg wasn't there to see it. And eventually Jay becomes so scared that she takes off in Greg's car and she accidentally plows into a cornfield, and the next day she ends up in a hospital where she has sex with Greg on the hospital bed. So she passes on the curse to Greg, the guy who was skeptical that the entity ever existed in the first place. So a few days pass by, and then Jay's just randomly staring out her window, and she sees the entity in the form of her neighbor and the guy she had sex with, Greg, break into the window of Greg's house, and she tries to call him. He doesn't pick up, so naturally what she does is she runs over to his house because they're next door neighbors. And as she's walking up the stairs, the entity changes from Greg. It changes into a form of Greg's mom, and this entity ends up killing Greg. So eventually the curse goes back to Jay. And one quick important note to remember is that Jay has this one friend named Paul that has a crush on Jay, but because Jamie, aka Jay, does not have feelings for him and she doesn't want this poor guy to have the curse, she refuses his offer for sex. So her only other option would be to try to kill this thing. So they end up creating this sort of trap where they set up a whole bunch of electrical devices and they try to lure this entity into the swimming pool that they find, and they try to get the entity inside the swimming pool and throw electronic devices in there to try to kill it. At first they don't succeed, but eventually we see that they end up shocking the thing and we see a pool of blood everywhere. So our only guess is that they ended up killing it. So afterwards, Jay and Paul end up having sex. Paul being the guy that had a crush on Jay that she didn't want to have sex with originally. So they have sex, and then later we see that Paul is driving past a few prostitutes in, the shady part of town, but we never actually see him having sex with one of these prostitutes, but we do see him driving past, so we can't say for sure that he had sex with one of these prostitutes. And our doubts are reassured, and we know for sure that he did not have sex with one of the prostitutes, because later on, at the end of the movie, when we see Jay and Paul holding hands walking down, we see the entity following them when they don't know it. So they're just walking along, holding hands, they're walking down, and they're holding hands, and they're being followed by this entity. And that's where the movie ends. And if you guys want, I'm going to do an explanation of what I think, in my theory, on what this spirit or entity is. And I'm actually going to put up a card with a video linking to my theories on what this entity is on the right section of the video. So make sure you check that out. But this is my summary and my explanation of the movie. And I don't think that he had sex with a prostitute, because we see them being followed by this entity. Because if he did have sex with this prostitute, the prostitute would have ended up having sex with another guy, that it would just come back to this prostitute, and then if it ever did come back to the prostitute, she would again have sex with somebody else, and it would just repeat the cycle. So the likelihood of the curse being brought back to the original people, Jay and Paul, is just very, very rare. So I doubt that he had sex with this prostitute. And those are just my theories on this movie. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And please feel free to check out my video on what I think and what my theory is on what this entity is on the right section at the top of this video. Until next time, Max out.